hear me? Is everyone? Yes? Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. It is hot and humid, so just a quick logistics word. There are restrooms in the back and cool water in a bubbler 1 floor down. So if you need a little, restoration, just get up and go. Nobody will think anything less of you. So tonight we're going to hear 2 stories. We're going to hear the story of Ben and Whitney Waxman and their journey founding American Roots 9 years ago, and the challenges that entailed, and the successes and the heartbreak. All of that is chronicled in our second story tonight, and that's Rachel Slade, who wrote about American Roots here in Making It in America. I'd like the subhead, The Almost Impossible Quest to Manufacture in the USA and How It Got That Way. There are books over there. If you're curious, you're welcome to purchase them. And we have also for sale some of the American Roots gear. I read this book, and all I wanted to do was feel the quality of these sweatshirts, because that's the proof of the pudding for me. I really wanted to have a chance to see just how well made and how cool these sweatshirts are. And now that I've had that chance, I can vouch for them. So Bill and Allie already covered some of it too, so let me just say, I agree. It's wonderfully appropriate that we're having this conversation in Mechanics Hall, because this is where, when Maine was changing from an agrarian society to an industrial society, all of these trades groups opened up. And this is where shipbuilders and carpenters and masons and jewelry makers and iron workers, this is where they gathered. It was their hub for sharing resources and for opening up educational opportunities to one another. So it's perfect that we're having this conversation here tonight. Additionally, it's great that we're doing it here in Maine. I mean, manufacturing has been the state's economic mainstay for centuries now. And it continues to be that way with things like shipbuilding and aviation manufacturing. But you don't hear too much about things like textile manufacturing. That wasn't the case even 50 years ago. I spent a lot of time in Lewiston. The Bates Mill complex there is amazing, and it was founded by Benjamin Bates, who also founded Bates College. But he, as an entrepreneur, he wanted to manufacture cotton, apparel, and other things. And at the beginning of the Civil War, he bought as much cotton as he possibly could and stockpiled it. His contemporaries thought this was going to be a 90-day skirmish. And so when their supplies ran out, he was sitting in the catbird seat and was the primary source for Union tents and Union uniforms. So I think, and then Bates eventually became famous for making very fancy bedspreads and other kinds of things, which has all sort of tapered off. But now we have American Roots. It is trying to revive domestic manufacturing. I mean, Ben, you could have done this so much simpler. But his founding principles were to use only domestically sourced materials and union labor. And so it's wonderful that 9 years in, they're making a success, that revenues to date are north of 20 million, right, from founding, and you have 100 employees? 75. Close, okay, close. So it's really been a successful story, and Rachel describes it very beautifully in this book. If you think, I mean, she tells their story, but it's against the backdrop of what's been happening nationally and globally around trade policy and tariffs and labor laws and regulatory changes. And I think you do a really great job of weaving that together. If you think, oh, a book about trade policy and logistics and supply chains, it's a really good read. It's very engaging, and I recommend it. So check it out afterwards. For our format, so we're going to have a conversation And that's going to go on for a half hour or 40 minutes or so. And then we're going to switch to questions. Some of you submitted questions when you registered for this event. We have those queued up. But you're welcome to ask questions as part of our live audience if you'll queue up over at that microphone. We're asking you to ask your question there so that the recording equipment will get your questions, because this will be posted online after the event. So I think I've covered all the bases in terms of setting this up. Rachel, why don't you get the ball rolling? Tell us a little bit about your journey with making it in America.
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for that incredible introduction. And yes, how fitting that we are here. We're here in Maine. We're here in Portland. I mean, this was the epicenter of manufacturing for so long for textiles and apparel. And of course, it was critical to the development of America. I live in Boston, after we fought the Revolutionary War, and won, by the way, we didn't have the capability to make almost anything. And so one of the first things that President George Washington did was he turned to his young friend, Alexander Hamilton, and he said, we need to make things for ourselves. Because if we don't, we're going to be right back where we started, basically completely tied to the British economy in a way that we just fought a war to avoid. And so entering the Industrial Revolution was the first order of business to become these United States. Alexander Hamilton spent a year interviewing people, trying to figure out what do we need to do policy-wise to get this thing started. And he delivered the Report of Manufacturers to Congress in 1793. And what's really interesting to me is that his recommendations in that report still remain critical to our success as a nation, I believe. And the three, I'm just gonna, just bear with me for 1 second, then we can get into the good stuff and talk to these amazing people. But the three recommendations were tariffs to slow down the importation of cheap goods. We have tariffs that are so low that manufacturers have no hope of competing with the cheap goods coming into our country. And I think everybody here knows that. No hope. And so we're going to actually talk about why prices are. Can you hear me, by the way? Is it coming through? Okay. Tariffs. Number two, banking. We needed banking. We needed a stable currency, but we also needed banking to ensure that people who wanted to get into industry had access to financing. You can't grow. You can't do research and development. You can't buy new equipment unless you have access to inexpensive money. That sounds fundamental, right? People are still facing that today, these problems today. We're going to talk about that. And then finally, the last piece of it is infrastructure. Yawn, boring, but absolutely necessary to ensure that our supply chain is robust and strong and, by the way, can work within these United States again. So actually, there's very strong supply, there's very strong infrastructure outside of the United States because it's heavily subsidized by other countries that are following the very model that we started. I'm going to mention China, but also Vietnam and other places. Like, they understand how critical industrial policy is to getting to getting manufacturing going, so that basically you can rule the world, which we did for years and years and years. So just very quickly about me, I'm from Philadelphia. I was actually born in Baltimore. I'm from Philadelphia. I went to school in New York, and now I live in Boston. I mentioned those 44 cities for one simple reason. Those are all post-industrial cities. Philadelphia especially was a massive manufacturing town. When I was born in 1969, do not do the math. If you do, you are evicted from the building. When I was born, it was already almost post-industrial. And I was surrounded, as you are in New England, by all the remnants of this incredible past when we made things. And still in my lifetime, over my lifetime, it used to be that things were made in America. My clothes were made in America. That my clothes were union made in the 70s. And I watched that disappear, as all of you have. And I kept wondering, what the fuck is going on? And finally, 2020, I realized when the pandemic hit and people started to talk about the supply chain, about the fact that we couldn't medicate ourselves, about the fact that we couldn't protect nurses and first responders, about the fact that shelves were bare at moments because we couldn't unload ships fast enough from Asia. That's when I think everybody else kind of caught up with my sense of alarm that we couldn't take care of ourselves and our people anymore because we were no longer manufacturing here. And it was just at that moment that I was so lucky to walk into Ben and Whitney's life. And as soon as I found out what they were doing, and as soon as I met the people who worked with them, and some of them are here, and it's just such a great honor that you're here, Anam. As soon as I realized what they were doing, that they had built something out of nothing, manufacturing, out of nothing, there was nothing here, and that they, in the process, lifted dozens of families out of poverty, gave them good paying jobs that had real life to it, that's when I realized I want to tell the story, and I hope that my passion for what they have done and for manufacturing in general will catch on. That's my hope, that's my dream. That's why I'm here tonight, and I'm so excited to have a conversation with Ben and Whitney for the first time since the book came out. They're still talking to me, so I guess that's a good thing.
You guys go ahead.
You want to go first? No, you go first. There was a lot of back and forth. My name's Ben. I was born and raised in Maine, born in Camden, raised in Portland. I'm a bulldog. I live in Westbrook now, so I think my kids are going to be blue blazes, I think. That's the plan. But I do want to just point of privilege before we get started to recognize my father and brother who are here. My dad and my mom, Dory, helped build American Roots from day one. My mom couldn't be here tonight, but she wishes she could be here. And also the workforce that's here. They're all in the back. I'm not going to go through all the names, but it was great to see our first employee, Anam Jabir. Where is she? I think she's standing somewhere. She's in the back. I'm just going to do it. We got Regad and Tom and Makenga and Maria and Aaron and Emily and who else is back there? Dee Dee. And if I forgot somebody I haven't seen you, I apologize.
And some of their children are here.
And their children, that's right, yeah. There's a lot of kids at American Roots. You know, this all started with a crazy idea, and it really started with my mom, who, after I moved home from working in Washington for 15 years for the late president of the AFL-CIO, Rich Trumka, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had spent 2 years making more money than I'd ever made in my life as a consultant, because what do you do after you leave Washington? You go become a consultant. It's part of the problem with Washington, is there's too many consultants. And one hot summer day, my mom said to me, she says, well, why don't you come see where I'm buying wool in Uxbridge, Mass. And they were actually making wool again in Massachusetts. And she said, maybe we can start a blanket business. And I was like, Mom, there's no way I'm going into the blanket business with you. I love you, you're my mother. I told her this too. And she said, just come, we could make something. I said, all right. And Whitney and I got in the car with Dory, and we drove down. It was about 95 degrees outside, and it was about 110 degrees inside the mill. And I don't know anybody here that's been to a woolen mill, but it is about as raw and gritty as it gets. And by the way, there's a lot of euphoric, beautiful things, and Rachel, you did an amazing job putting together this whole story and telling us a history of manufacturing. But there is nothing euphoric about manufacturing. It is hard, it is boring, it is long, but it is a necessary thing that we need to bring back to America. And when I walked into that mill, Whitney and I had this moment. There was a loom that was going 100 miles an hour, and on the other side of the mill, there was a series of looms that were covered in cobwebs. And I'd spent 15 years of my life at the AFL-CIO traveling in places like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Youngstown, Ohio, Flint, Michigan, places like Millinocket in Maine, where policy was decided and factories were shut down. Those were policy decisions. That's what those were, and they were about money. And I looked at Whitney, and we just had this moment. And I said, we're going to build a fucking factory. And that's how it started. And then flash forward, we didn't really know what we were going to make. And Mom and Whitney and I were talking, we're going to do blankets, and then we're going to do this. Ships, I was going to build boats. Yeah, we were going to do boats. My friend John Napolitano was excited about that. He's in the back. The building trades would have had a lot of jobs.
I said I'm leaving.
She said she was leaving. And then I was plowing driveways with a friend of ours, Ian Hayward, one night, and I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I'm wearing this fleece vest that Marty Walsh, some of you may know Marty, he's the mayor of Boston. His lawyer gave it to me, and I gave one to my dad, Suffolk Downs. And it was made by a great Maine company. And I said, where's this thing made? And I took it off, and it was embroidered, Suffolk Downs on the left chest. And in big letters, it said, made with USA Fabrics. And in little letters, it said, assembled in El Salvador. So the material was being made in Lawrence, Massachusetts at Polar Tech, put on a truck, sent to Boston Harbor, put on a ship, sent to El Salvador, and sent back for a profit margin of upwards of 200 to 300%. That's how profitable it is to make things in other parts of the world. And at that moment, the light bulb exploded. I ran home, woke Whitney up, and said, we're going to build a factory. And she said, go to bed. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and it's snowing outside. And I went downstairs and I watched a video about Aaron Fernstein, who started Polar Tech, and the rest is a long story. But the credit goes to the community that helped build this company. And there are some people in this room I'm not going to name, from investors and the people that have believed in us, to our family, and more importantly to the workers, because working in a factory is hard work. It is long hours. It is hard work on your body, and we're just getting warmed up. So I'll stop there. What?
Okay. Okay. So I'm just curious. One of the themes in Rachel's book has to do with policies that are destructive to American manufacturing. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that with some real life examples from American Roots, because I think that's what, when people talk about policy decisions, it's often abstract. They don't understand what the repercussions and the implications are. So could you just pick one or two examples of American manufacturing policies or trade policies
Just
that really,
one or two?
Yeah, just one or two, because it's, close to 7, so we got some ground to cover.
You want to go first? I mean, Rich, my mentor in many ways, and an old boss, he used to give this talk about common sense economics. And in that talk, he used to use the phrase, the economy is not like the weather. You can predict economic conditions with good policy. And sometime after the Vietnam War, legislatures on both sides of the aisle, I make that clear, this is a Democrat, Republican, and said, we're going to make more money for the top. We're going to make more money. We're going to find. The simplest way to do that was to turn America from the country that built the first car, made steel, built roads, farmed its land, mined its mine, all those things, and said, we're going to go overseas because we can make a lot more money. And when that happened, legislation like Central American Free Trade Agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the impacts those had on our ability as a country to actually sustain itself for the long run are being felt now. And I think were eye-opening when COVID hit, because I can remember being on the phone with another entrepreneur, James Morin, who's a good friend of mine. There were CEOs, elected officials in this state, on March 14th saying, you have to turn your PPE within 10 to 14 days. That was as real as it gets. Now, many of them have amnesia, and I'll be honest, because they're still buying stuff from China. But I got the mic, so I'm going to say what I want. So is that you can control how we tariff, and Rachel touches on this. It's about tariffs. You have to level the playing field. There are companies that can make t-shirts for $1.50. It is not okay that in 3 months' time, less than that, 2 months from time, my brother and I, Adam, who has children, will be probably taking our kids, because there's no other place to go, to Old Navy. I hope not Old Navy. I can't stand that place. But a lot of other parents will see those ads that say $10 sweatshirts, $8 polos. I want you to think about what the impact is when you make a sweatshirt for $10. Because keep in mind, that company is not selling that sweatshirt for less than a 300 or 400% profit. So think about the impact, not just the fact that the person who's making it is living way below poverty, beyond anything anybody in this room can imagine, including myself, but the environmental impact, the fact that 2 out of every 4 garments that are made by 27,000 factories in Southeast Asia go into a landfill on a yearly basis, that those clothes are now being put on airplanes, and the carbon footprint, let alone ships, is leaving an impact that is going to decimate this world we live in. And the second largest polluter in the world, behind oil and gas, is the textile industry. So if there's any other reason for us to make things in America, it's because it's 85 degrees outside and it's May. I drove by Sebago Lake this winter in February, and there wasn't an ounce of ice. So all of it comes together, and it is all directly can be a better.
Whitney, Rachel, you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, I can never follow Ben, but I do want to say that I spoke to a clothing manufacturer out in LA. And I asked him, why are you making stuff here? He said, because he was telling me, he's like, it's so hard to make in the United States. It's so hard. I was like, tell me why it's hard. He had a litany of reasons why it was so hard. And I said, so then why are you doing it? And he said, why? I'll tell you why. Because I used to work for other brands that made abroad. And he said, it takes a wealthy, powerful country to manufacture right, to manufacture ethically and environmentally. It takes the United States and other countries to do this properly, the way you would feel good about it, the way I would feel good about it. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm putting up with the craziness that is American manufacturing. And by the way, the reason American manufacturing, especially in apparel, is difficult right now is because we shipped it abroad, which means that we lack the infrastructure, right, to be able to do it efficiently at this point. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth recovering, as we have found. And that's what these folks are doing. They're rebuilding an entire industry, the first one to get shipped abroad, but obviously anywhere but the last industry to get shipped abroad. But clothing manufacturing was the first to go. And now it's, I hope, one of the first to come back. If we value what we wear, if we want to wear our values, in other words, if we care about spending our money on our neighbors and our community and people who pay taxes in our nation to support labor regulations, to support environmental regulations, like that's the circle of life as far as I'm concerned.
So I think there was a quote in the book, Rachel, it was from, I think one of your managers had said, what we're selling is a value system, what we're making are clothes. And I thought that was really poignant. It speaks to what you were just saying.
Absolutely.
That's a good call. Who said that?
Evan.
Evan. Oh, Evan. Oh, Evan.
Evan
I
said
love Evan.
We talked a little bit about tariffs. We talked a little bit about infrastructure. The third leg of the stool that Hamilton mentioned was banking and financing. I know that that has been an enduring challenge. And any small business operator, any entrepreneur understands that seeking money, finding money is just all-encompassing and very discouraging. So can you talk a little bit about what your journey was like? And is there like a bright light? I'm alluding to the possibility of tapping those great big pension funds that some of the unions oversee for financing for these kinds of entrepreneurial efforts.
You go first.
I can talk about the
Yeah.
frustrations
Yeah.
of it, for sure. My experience as a business owner is that financial institutions will give you money when they know that you don't need it, which does not help a small business like ours. We've been fortunate enough to have a handful of individuals who have believed in what we're doing and invested. And that has been wonderful, and we would not be where we are today without them. But that doesn't cut it, right? And yeah, sure. It takes more than that to operate well and to grow. A business like ours, it simply needs working capital. You need a line of credit, right, to operate well and to be able to grow. I'll paint a little picture for you guys, if you don't mind. Let's say you've got $500,000 in receivables. You've got $500,000 in pending sales that you know are going to close a month from now, but they're not closing now. And you've got $100,000 in the bank. And the receivables aren't coming in as quickly as you would like them to. Can you guys hear me?
Is it on?
Can you hear me? I'll try to speak up. The receivables are slow to come in. You don't want to jeopardize partnerships with your customers by calling them and asking them, how quick can you get that check in the mail? Again. You've got payroll next week. And, oh, wait, you're out of zippers and thread, so you don't know what to do about the upcoming production next week. Tom. So what do? Well, you cover payroll, right? Because that's the most important thing to do, retain your workforce. And by the way, it's the moral thing to do, right? And that's what we're here for. But what does that mean? It means that the raw materials are delayed. So it means that you're facing a possible paid shutdown for a day or two. And I say paid because you want to retain your workforce. And when those materials are ready, you're paying extra for expedited shipping because you want to get your team back to work. Your sales team, instead of being focused on chasing new deals, is chasing receivables. And you're in this cycle where you can't produce efficiently, and therefore you can't be profitable. Businesses like ours need relationships with financial institutions. It is crucial to the success of this industry, and any industry with small businesses, really. But American Roots has been increasing our revenue growth year after year, up to 40% at times, and yet we can't still get a line of credit from a bank. And so the cycle continues, and so does the struggle. I'll let one of you speak to the promise.
Yeah, I think there's, I am a capitalist, period. But in order to live in a capitalist society, you have to have capital. That's a fact, okay? At some point, the financial system, post-2008, chose to punish everybody for a few bad actors. creditors' hands are tied, small banks' hands are tied, whatever it is. At some point, it's got to be fixed. And there has to be some risk. And there's also, I go to the economic shift in America from making things to a service economy. Everybody wants to invest in this room in a company that has a 100x return. Everybody, don't lie. Everybody wants to get the biggest return they possibly can in their portfolio on a regular basis. The problem is you can't make things in America and have the same return as Silicon Valley on a regular basis. You cannot do it. You can make a profit. You can put people to work. You can pay them good wages. You can build schools. You can build roads. And you can have the most powerful, sustaining infrastructure the world has ever seen. But if we don't invest in those things and we continue to rely on a service economy versus an economy that actually makes things, our financial system will be forced and continue to play the game of what is the biggest return and what is the lowest risk. And Senator King, you missed this one line he said from Angus King. You know, he said that when you started, and he said it right. Banks lend you money when they know you don't need it. Period. I'm not sugarcoating it. And we know that when you rip apart the profit and loss at American Roots and you look at month, week, quarter, day, when the company is operating efficiently, it is a profitable company. But when you look at those dark days and those dark months, and there's people in this room that intimately know about that, it is very difficult to operate without sustained capital on a regular basis.
And is there a silver lining? Is there opportunity with the pension funds that are mentioned in Rachel's book?
You know, I mean, we spent a year, our board and everybody else, thinking about how do we raise more capital from an equity standpoint. I think one of the smartest things we did as a company is we stepped back and said, how do we diversify to get through times when things aren't good? And so we've partnered with other American-made, union-made companies to increase our margins, to increase our profitability, and that's proving to be great. And then we stepped back and we said, we need to invest in long-term contracts, and we've done that. And this year, just now, we're starting to see that pay off where the company is off on a rocket ship. But cash is still the issue, because you can grow, but if you can't feed the burn, you're in deep shit. So we're continuing to look into that. The labor movement built this company, and I have no qualms about that. It was the building and construction trades unions, it was the industrial unions, the public sector unions who said, we're going to walk the walk, talk the talk, and we're going to buy American and buy union. Private industry is now stepped forward, and there's some great companies that are supporting us on the private sector well, too, which is great.
The discussion about the pension funds is really interesting. In other countries, including Germany and I think Canada, correct me if I'm wrong, union pension funds actually typically invest about 13% in manufacturing within that country. It is, I don't know if it's a requirement, but it's like standard operating procedure that. So pension funds, of course, are working people's capital, right? So you're talking about state workers and teachers in unions. About $8 trillion in the United States represented by retired pension funds. So it's a major part of the stock market, right? In America, it is working. The problem is typically that the people who are managing those funds are making the same kinds of short-term investment decisions that, well, the financial sector typically does. And so instead of having a directive, which is like, oh, by the way, reinvest in manufacturing in the United States, they're chasing all the same things that Wall Street does, which actually might seem a little contradictory when you're taking working people's capital to invest in working people. I mean, that should be the directive. So so Ben and Whitney, sorry, Ben and I just ran into each other in DC, where there's a large movement trying to get big pension funds to start really rethinking about their investment strategy in terms of, long-term thinking, not like short-term banks, not like a lot of the financial instruments that we have, but like really reinvesting in the things that are so important to the people who are giving them the money to do this in the first place. So I think it's a really exciting time. A lot of that money right now, they're hoping is going to go into building the clean energy infrastructure that we now need. Right now, Americans are undergoing the largest infrastructure construction since Eisenhower, right? So never in my lifetime have I seen what we plan to do, which is build a whole new energy grid that can handle now renewables. Like, that's a huge task. And it's a public-private partnership right now because our energy grid is actually a patchwork of public and private industry or holdings, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. It actually very much reflects the healthcare industry in the United States. So if you need an analog to think about how crazy our energy grid is, just look at healthcare. Does that work for you? Does that work for everybody? If not, that's what we're facing now. And so right now, the idea is to try to get pension money into investing in like really basic building blocks so that we can build this incredible new infrastructure so we can actually like get turbines online and get solar online or wherever you want to find your renewables. So that's why we were talking about pensions. I don't want to bore you again, but like this is big stuff. This is a big moment in America. And our fate is being decided, I think, right now. It starts today in terms of who's going to be making what and where is our energy going to come from and how efficient is going to be, how's it all going to work. It's happening right now. Very important election, by the way, coming up in November.
So I'm curious, you're 9 years in. What advice would you give other entrepreneurs who want to consider manufacturing that have domestically sourced materials and union labor? Yeah, what advice would you, and were there any Maine-based organizations that helped you along the way?
Yep, it's all yours.
Yes, absolutely, Carol. There were many Maine organizations that helped to build American roots. And it was brought up earlier, the history of manufacturing in Maine, and I think that's important to note because what I have noticed is how the state of Maine really acknowledges the importance of manufacturing. And that has been seen in the support that we've gained through organizations like Coastal Enterprises and Maine MEP, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, MTI, and Goodwill Industries. All of these folks were crucial to the growth of American Roots. When we started the company, Ben's mom, Dory, was the one who reached out to CEI and Goodwill, and they were crucial to helping to fund the training program that was started that trained the stitchers that we brought on that were our first employees. So it's really been great to have that, by our side as we've grown over the last 9 years. As far as advice to entrepreneurs in relation to that, I would say absolutely do your research. The support is there, and so if you have to hire somebody to do that full time, do it. It's worthwhile because, the resources are there.
I mean, I think, one, as far as straight advice to an entrepreneur, one, you have to be a little nuts. Like, not a little, you got to be crazy to do something big. You can't go like half in. You got to go all in. And just because you think it's a good idea doesn't mean you're going to sell anything. I had a guy come in to our factory in year 2, and he wanted us to make long underwear. And he had done no research, but he thought he had the greatest long underwear ever invented. And I went online, and the same long underwear you can buy at LL Bean or across the street at Rennie's or wherever else. You have to have an idea to make something or to do something that people want. And I mean that, like, seriously. Like, if nobody says, if you don't have somebody to sell it to, don't do it. Well, I don't have time for BS. Like, somebody came to me and said, I got this idea. If I thought they could sell it to an audience, I'd say do it. Second, find a partner, because building a business is the loneliest mountain you will ever climb in your entire life. And my childhood best friend, Kevin Kane, said that to me because he started a business. He said, you're lucky you have Whitney. You two are doing it together. And he built a business. But literally, you have to go through those moments and have to accept fear. You can't fear fear. You have to accept it. And you have to keep going. You better have a good lawyer. Try to have a good banker, if you can find one. I like bankers, some of them. And be passionate about what you do. You have to be all in. You cannot go half in. You have to give everything you have, knowing very well that it may not work. But you can't put that in your head. You have to eliminate that. People ask me, is American Roots going to work? 100%. 100%. No doubt.
So I have other questions, but now I'm going to turn the microphone over to you folks so that you have an opportunity to ask your questions. So if you have a question, you want to go over to the mic, please do so. And if you're making your way over there, or as you're making your way over there, I'm going to toss one of the questions that was submitted from our early registration. And that is, so this person said, how can we assume the general public has the financial ability to buy American made because that's the right thing to do? I believe your many years with the union have made a big difference in your success. And I think he's referring to the fact that your first market were union organizations. I'm interested to know how successful you've been outside of contracts with union organizations, and do you always buy American made even when it is a higher price? It's nice to think everyone could do this, but how realistic is it?
First, I just wanted to throw out, so they spend $680 a year on clothing. And that represents more than 6 dozen pieces. So people are buying incredible volume, and they are spending money, but they're buying in bulk. I don't think I have ever bought 68 pieces in a year. Do you? But that's the average. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, because when you talk about like this piece is expensive or that piece is expensive, how many sweatshirts do you need? I'm just gonna, I just need to ask you that.
You want to go first? You want me to go first? Go ahead.
Well, that's a great point, Rachel. And, I think we have a responsibility to educate about this industry. You can go buy 68 pieces of clothing in a year. Half of them are probably or you can hoodie that is made in the United States, that was made, that helped contribute to, sending someone's kid to college or helping someone buy a home, to give a person a job that they are happy going to every day, and that they feel dignified in the work that they're doing. I think it's our responsibility to help educate people that that's what you're buying. And back to that, wearing your values. I don't think that we can assume that everyone can afford this. I don't think we can assume that. But our ultimate goal is to become efficient enough that we are actually able to lower that price point so that it does become more accessible as well.
I think the other thing I just mentioned was, the great American workers with productivity, right? This started happening in the 1980s as we started offshoring. And now people who lost jobs in the manufacturing industry, in the manufacturing sector, and moved into the service economy are making 2/3 on average of what they made before. So when we talk about what can we afford, why can't we afford these things anymore? Part of it is that we have lost economic power when we lost manufacturing. We lost our connection to our own economy, while the very wealthy have gotten exceedingly more wealthy over that same period of time. So there's much less distribution of wealth in the United States, and that's part of the reason that these things seem so expensive to us. Not to mention the fact that those extremely cheap goods that people are buying from abroad are heavily subsidized by other governments, specifically to put Americans out of business. I mean, there's this grander vision, especially in Chinese industrial policy, to put Europe and American manufacturers out of business so that we are beholden to that country's productivity. It's critical to their survival. And in fact, right now we're going through another period of dumping. It's called dumping, where there are goods coming specifically from China, because there's been a lot of overproduction, goods being dumped on to America and to Europe, costing cheaper. What we pay is cheaper than what it costs to produce. Right? Like, let that sink in for a minute. It's cheaper than what it costs to produce, specifically so that we are become addicted to these very low, artificially low prices, and opt for that and export our economy there, instead of supporting the people who are making things here and are contributing very much to our economy, our welfare, and our community.
Thank you. Let's take the question from this woman over here.
Hey there, thank you. This is a very important topic. I'm a former science teacher who just got my law degree, and I have 2 points. One is that we've gotten so used to living in an unsustainable way. My mom would hem our jeans, and then I would always get the hand-me-down. The jean lasted much longer, when you could change the hem. We dried everything on a clothesline, and it almost feels like there should be an insert with the clothes, like this is how you do it or something. But in any case, I had the fortune of working with the Clean Energy Partnership of the Maine state government, and so I got really aware that the pipeline of electricians, welders, and every other trade are woefully deficient. And even more distressing to me was that 2%, fully 2% of all electricians in Maine are women. And so I'm kind of hoping that as we dignify the trades, that we also have 4th grade, how you strip a wire, how you solder a wire, that we really do a kind of education and a reclamation of how important it is that we're self-reliant and that we treat our workers with dignity. And so I'm curious too about your connection to unions and how you feel about that as part of the manufacturing scene. And so thank you for what you're doing. Okay.
Are you next? Yes, okay, great.
You want to do all the questions first?
Oh, no. So, I'm sorry.
Want me to answer that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, she asked it. Well, I should answer it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, listen, labor is the only, unions are the only economic voice for working people in the history of this country, period. That's it. That's it. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or anything like that. It is labor unions. And to that point, you know, I'm the end of Gen X, 1979. Thanks, Dad. I'm in the end of Gen X. I'm proud of that, by the way. I'm not going to go there right now. Anyway, yeah, see, Allison knows Gen X. With Josh in the back, no, he's a Gen X guy. We'll keep going. We're all Gen Xers. But that being said, you're supposed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rules. That was instead of investing in trade schools, instead of programs being at the forefront of public education, and you ask about, you know, the previous question, the person asked, is it realistic to buy American-made, you know, union-made, you name it, ethically made? It goes back to what my brother Adam and Josh always say. We have to educate a society. We have walked back educating people in America. Nobody understands what it is when you walk into Walmart. Nobody understands, oh man, I'm so excited. I got this package from Amazon. I ordered it 3 hours ago and a drone dropped it off on my table and I get to get the next part in 2 hours. Hey, guess what? That's not good. It's cool, but somebody's paying a price for it. The person who made it, the environment we're living in. And so the more that we can educate people on the impacts, and by the way, I am pro technology, okay? We are pro automation at American Roots. We are pro AI. We're pro all those things. If it allows our workforce to make a higher wage, have more sustained work and longevity, that is a good thing for all of us.
There's my friend Ned Cook is in the audience. He teaches art history at Yale. And something that I found really fascinating was that he had students who were learning material culture. Material culture. It's like when you look at an object, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher it, Ned, so please excuse me. But when you look at an object and you analyze the society that made it from how it was crafted and the materials that are used to build this thing. Anyway, my point is that, so Ned is teaching this to master's students, am I right? And very few people had actually worked with any of these materials before. So it was actually like an intellectual exercise to talk about wood and the properties of wood, or metal and the properties of metal, or fabric, the properties of fabric. What I'm saying is, one of the things that we lack when we don't have manufacturing is a connection to the materiality of our world, right? So we don't know how things are made. And that's a serious problem, because when we want to innovate, in my opinion, when we want to innovate, if we want to innovate, if we want to be cutting edge in the United States, we need to understand how to manufacture things. When Yvon Chouinard, I apologize to him, the founder of Patagonia, a Mainer, we know this, right? When he decided that he wanted to build a company around a material that was warm when wet, he went to Malden Mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where they made textiles and they invested a lot of money every year in R&D. And we mentioned Aaron Feuerstein, who owned that company. And Yvon said to Aaron, this is what I'm imagining. I think it's polyester. Let's figure this out. And the result of this union was polar fleece. Fleece, something that is ubiquitous, maybe not today when it's 85 degrees outside in Maine, but like in the winter, you see fleece everywhere. Fleece was invented just probably like 100 miles from here, because an entrepreneur decided to work with a manufacturer to invent something completely new. You can only do this when you know how to make stuff. Innovation and manufacturing are like
Now, our next question.
I don't know if this is on. I'm Kristen Vermeulen. I'm a podcast host of called Makers of the USA. Started this in the midst of the pandemic. It's been amazing to see y'all's passion up here. You know, I'm a millennial and I want to educate people in my neck of the woods because us millennials don't really understand that purchasing things made in America creates an impact. And I know a lot of us purchase things on Amazon, as you mentioned, taking the easy way out. So the one thing I wanted to ask you guys is I've interviewed many makers across the nation, including those in Maryland as well. I know you mentioned you're from Baltimore. I am as well. So the one thing I always end with my interviews is why make things in the location where you are in? Is it the culture? Is it the community? Is it the people? And every single time I hear it's community. What have you found in your journey in regards to other makers? Have you built forums with other makers that are doing the same things? How can we go and educate other people who want to be makers and want to thrive and make, you know, America, you know, great by manufacturing and building that and continuing to build that? So can you educate us on how we can take action and being a part of these forums? I mean, I know there's some here in Maine, but maybe there's other nationally that we can be aware of.
I think it's really just about connecting, you know, I mean, to keep it simple. Maine, we're fortunate, and again, I do want to emphasize as well that it's about community. I mean, this was Ben's vision. This company was Ben's vision, and the vision was to create jobs in his hometown. This is not my hometown, but it is my town now.
Yankee family, talk about that.
But it's really about connection. You know, I think we're fortunate in Maine to have several makers here, and we've been able to have that discussion with other companies, you know, because there is that base of manufacturing, sea bags, Hyperlite, you know, there's so many, Sterling rope, but it's been great to have that. You know, I had a conversation with a woman who is a teacher up at Oxford Mills Tech High School a few days ago, and she is desperately trying to hang on to this program that she teaches, that she's been teaching for 16 years, they're trying to cut. But she's putting, you know, sewers out into the world, which is so crucial. And that brings me to our relationship with Common Threads of Maine, which is, you know, the program that Ben's mom, Dory, took and ran with and just, you know, made a wonderful program that connects all of these businesses together. And so that's been a real central point to bring these businesses together and kind of create that forum for us, you know, to have these conversations about how do we build, how do we make things better, how do we work together to maybe make this easier, because it ain't easy.
And you got to have a willing workforce. You know, you have to. You can't just make things in America. You know, there's actually people that make things in America that aren't the greatest employers in the world, and you know, you gotta create an environment where people want to come into work. You know, we actually have a lot of retention at the company because of quality of life. You know, you poll the workforce, the number one thing that everybody wants, more time off. They want to be with their families. Figure out what your workforce wants. That's like critical, you know, and be willing to adapt. You know, somebody said, how do you have, you know, all the new Americans that have walked through our doors? The only people that walked through our doors the first 2 years were people who had just walked into this country. They built American roots. That's a fact, no question about it. And my mother, Dory, has taken that to a different level with Common Threads of Maine. And, you know, there are great companies like Whit said, you know, I mean, Flowfold, there's a classic example, right? You know, James Morin and what's his name? Devin McNeil and Charlie, you know, the five of us, when everybody else was shut down, we went into a factory on March 13th. I mean, literally, like, there was nothing open in Westbrook, Maine, except the gas station, I think. And that was a classic example of collaboration. So you got to lean on people, and you can learn from each other.
Great. It looks like, do you have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay, you will be our last question, unless somebody is like, starts stomping their foot and insists on asking another question, because we wanted to leave enough time at the end of our evening for people to, for Rachel to sign books, if anyone is interested in that, and for people to peruse the table over at American Roots and just to chat. And perhaps if there's any momentum here, there'll be ways that you can make connections and keep that momentum going. So go ahead, we'll take this as our last question.
Thank you very much. So I am actually the director of Baxter Academy, which is the science and technology school just down the street. And so I would love to hear from you what thoughts you have for educators, younger and for older kids. You know, what do you want to see out of our schools?
We nearly had a collision there.
So I have two wishes. One is we need to teach labor history in school. I don't know why we don't. Yeah. Absolutely critical to understanding American history is understanding the labor movement. It is the story of us, how we got here, how we built this country. That's my wish.
Well, you home here. We need to fund you guys. You know, I mean, education. We don't fund education. It's a problem. You can't change the curriculum if you don't prioritize education. Period. You know, and as far as my advice to an educator, I don't know if I'd give them advice. I'd want to hear what they need. You know, I mean, seriously, that's the bottom line. But I do think we have to encourage students that it's okay not to graduate from high school and go to a four-year college. It is okay to go to a tech school. It is okay to join IBW or the UA or the tin knockers or the laborers or the painters. It's because you want to stay close to home and you want to work your way up and have a union job. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think there's an education of what is the definition of education. I mean, I'm a college dropout. Glenn Cummings is here. It's the only econ class I ever took was with Glenn Cummings. I got a C-. I earned it though. So you know you have to invest in those things, and we have to prioritize education.
Great, thank you very much. And will you please join me in thanking our panelists? They're fabulous. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Mechanics Hall for letting us use this fabulous space for a conversation tonight. Thanks to all of you who came out in this very steamy May evening to hear some super interesting thoughts and really get the old gray matter firing here. We really appreciate that. So mill about, do what you want to do. Thank you.